This video is going to be about burnout. This wasn't a topic that I originally planned on making, but I attended a roundtable discussion for consulting arborists, and I found the discussion to be somewhat lacking. I'll be honest, I didn't participate, so I'm kind of on the hook for that as well. Although this video doesn't seem directly related to consulting, there are some facets of our work that may make us a little bit more prone to feeling this kind of burnout. Like any office white-collar job, there's an endless amount of work. I always think, oh, I know that I have another 2-3 weeks of work. If I finish early, I don't win at anything. I just get more work to do. And even though a consulting arborist job is not dangerous like a tree worker's job, you do have to make recommendations that can affect people's lives. So there is a stress or emotional component of that. I'll start by defining burnout as best as I understand it. So burnout is a state of chronic stress. It can be from the overwhelming nature of the work itself, or it could be the emotional components as well. So this can apply to your work, school, caretaking, things like that. There's a couple of consistent characteristics of burnout according to a Life Kit podcast episode I listened to from NPR. 1, you end up being mentally and physically exhausted. 2, you check out and you just don't care anymore. Number 3, you might end up blaming yourself. And then sort of like 4, you don't feel like you're in control of the situation. And this could eventually lead to or be associated with depression. So even though burnout doesn't sound like that big of a deal, it's in your best interest to manage it. I'm not sure that I've actually gotten to a burnout state. I think I get close to it and I start feeling that stress, but I've managed to fend it off at least. If you're someone who's prone to anxiety or being overwhelmed, stress, deriving your value from being productive, those are all things that may make you more prone to burnout, and those are, really fundamental things that you need to deal with a professional like a therapist. The tips I have are going to be roughly organized in order of things that you can do immediately to, towards the end of your current schedule to future, but it might be a little bit mixed up. Number 1 is to take some time in your day to brain dump everything you have to do. This is hard because you're already stressed, you're already overworked, and it's gonna feel like, well, this extra half hour, this extra hour is just gonna make my situation worse. For me, when I feel overwhelmed, then my to-do list or whatever, it just feels like this big cloud, and it just feels heavy, and I don't know what's in it. That's part of it. Not knowing is much more stressful than actually knowing. So make a list of everything that you know you have to do if you don't already have one, because then you can categorize them. You can categorize them based on urgent, important, not urgent, not important. And then you have this matrix. So that gives you an immediate priority level of targeting the important and urgent items first. What I find is that some stuff, like let's say not urgent, not important, they tend to fall off, or they come back later into one of the other categories, and then you can tackle them then. Having this list allows you to delegate some of the items that don't actually need to be done by you, or asking for help in other ways. At some point when you have the bandwidth to, you can also take this list, know about how long it takes you to do certain things, and schedule the important items out on your calendar. I also find that if I know how long I'm gonna be stuck overworking, it helps me to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Ultimately, if you have a high level role like that where people depend on you a lot, they are also going to need to learn to not depend on you sometimes. It's going to be good practice for them to not have full access to you all the time. For someone who's a true consultant, who doesn't do anything else, the actual emergencies that may occur are very minimal. I think most things with tree consulting can wait. Even if a contractor says, oh, we damaged these roots, we really need you to look at it, a couple of hours is not gonna make or break that situation, because you may be committed to a job site. You may be way out, hours away. You're not always gonna be able to make it there. So there's no harm in buying yourself time to do certain work distraction free, and then you can dedicate more of your time for these other clients. When you're looking at your schedule, see if there's some things that you can do to buy yourself some time to knock down that workload. That could look like skipping internal meetings where you're not needed, or if you are needed, can you present first and then leave? If you've got work site visits scheduled over multiple days, can you get them rescheduled to the same day? Can you talk to your clients about rescheduling certain things? If you just ask, as long as you say, hey, I'm committed to keeping the original date, I just want to see if you have any flexible to reschedule XYZ, you'll be surprised at what people are fine with. And that way, when you actually get to that meeting or site visit, you're going to be a lot fresher and you're going to do a much better job anyway. So it never hurts to ask. And this touches upon one of the factors of burnout, which is feeling a lack of control. If I've at least asked and tried to make an adjustment, then I feel better about it instead of just feeling like I'm at the whim of the world. This next tip I don't recommend as a long-term practice because it is ultimately going to get you into a bad habit. But when you're working, look for areas where you can cut corners briefly. And this is more of a survival thing. If you're trying to do 100% quality on everything you have and you're already overworked, you're going to be missing things that you're not aware of. This is up to your discretion. There's certain things within your workflow that are ultimately not as important as other things. For example, when I write construction related arborist reports, the site description, some parts of the project description are really not that important. I can minimize the amount of work I'm doing there and focus that energy on making sure that all my tree inventory, all my impact discussion, all of that stuff is free of errors. Another place where you might save some time and cut some minor corners is looking at your data collection. Is there data that you can skip out on collecting? For example, for something like a construction project, if you're seeing the same tree over and over, or if you know that every single tree here is going to get removed, can you limit some of that information that you're collecting? And this is going to be different depending on who you work for. I know some consulting arborists that work for larger firms. It's all about efficiency, so they barely collect any data. But for myself, I collect a really solid amount of data. I make a lot of notes, and it helps me in the future when I want to refer back to that tree. There may be situations where I can cut down on the amount of irrelevant notes that I'm taking. And it's a compromise on my personal standard of quality, but this is a temporary one-off sort of thing. It could also look like reducing the number of times you proofread your own report. When it comes to scheduling your work, at least determining what you're going to do, it's most efficient to do like items together. If you have a whole bunch of invoices to type up and send out, you get in a flow after some time just doing the same thing over and over. Figuring out a way to batch your work will reduce the amount of interruptions that you have at certain times. So if you can do all your emails, respond to all your calls or texts at once, then put your phone away so that you can focus on the client paying work that you actually have to do. And that's going to depend on the nature of your role. If you work in a consulting arborist firm, that's completely different from being a consulting arborist for a tree service, where maybe you're also a sales arborist and your crew's calling you. Those are more interruption heavy roles. When you can communicate what your needs are to your company, that may be one of the things that you can ask them to do, to give you periods of uninterrupted time so that you can be more present in the other times for them. When I feel some pressure, I find it easier to work than being completely free. But when there's so much pressure, I feel like I'm immobile. So one technique that I follow is what's called the Pomodoro method. It's a timer for either 25 or 30 minutes, then a break, and then you repeat, and then you take a longer break at some point. You can look that up if it works for you. Once I get into a flow of things, the work session will just kind of continue. This next tip has to do with field work. Especially if you've batched your field work, you might be looking at a long day. That might mean traffic in the morning and traffic after you're done. And it can be really tempting to just want to rush home or rush back to the office once you're done with the work. So that means rushing through the work as well. I try to take the opposite approach. What I'll do is make a good day out of it. Maybe I'm stopping for breakfast on my way in, and then I take my breaks and I try to find a table or some grass or something where it feels like an actual break instead of being scrunched up in my car on my phone, like shoveling food in my mouth. I might go and look for a drink that I want, like a coffee in the middle of the day. And at the end of the day, I might go out for dinner. It just feels more tolerable than being stuck in traffic and rushing through stuff. Moving forward, scheduling is going to be your biggest ally to avoid future burnout. It would be probably a good idea to investigate why you're in the situation you are. Was it within your control? Are you someone who wants to people please and get people in as soon as possible? You can come up with little rules for yourself. If you're prone to underestimating how long things take, then add an extra day or two as a buffer. That buffer doesn't necessarily need to be used for that project, and clients do not know your schedule. They do not need to know how far out you are actually booked. If it doesn't work for them, they are welcome to find someone else. There is only so much people pleasing that you can do, especially if it's going to harm you directly. Having this extra buffer will also be helpful if you have the kind of manager that likes to throw extra work on you, and that's something that you can't control, but at least you've gotten a buffer for yourself. I also find that for me, if a client is on the phone and pressuring me to give them a date as to when I can get out there, I tend to give them a date sooner than I should. I got this tip from someone that I worked with. She put a big old next site visit date on the calendar. So I have one now too. It's the only thing on my work calendar that's in red. I determined that would be the next day that I can do any kind of site visits during a time when I was more level-headed and not stressed and not being pressured. If you have the freedom or luxury to do it, add some rest or relaxed days to your calendar. If you work for yourself, put in regular vacation, for example. When I feel really stressed, it's usually because there's no end in sight. But if I knew, okay, I just gotta do this for 2 more weeks and then I have a little bit of a break, that makes it a lot easier to get through it, as opposed to being a really busy arborist. If you're one of the busiest ones, maybe you're 6 weeks out. Can you just work super hard for 6 weeks and then get a break? That just feels so much less sustainable. I would probably fully burn out before then. I also changed the terms of how I schedule. I used to write proposals that said the deliverables will be done 2 or 3 weeks from the acceptance of the proposal. You don't know when they're gonna accept it, and then it starts a 3 or 2 week time clock, whatever you put on the proposal. So I've switched to what a lot of other arborists do, which is 2 weeks, 10 days, whatever it is, from the site visit. So that buys you a little extra time for the site visit as well. If you are also someone who has a lot of work, then start charging more. You will lose some clients, and you'll also have some clients stick with you and just accept the higher rate, especially if the reason why you're so busy is because you're among the lowest charging arborists. Then you will scare some people off, but you may make the same amount of money, whether that's for yourself or for the company, with less work. If you have a client who's pushy with your timing, it is easy to want to give in because you're afraid of losing that client, but it's also possible to push back on them and say, hey, I can do this in a shorter amount of time, but there is a rush fee. Assuming that you actually have the capacity to do something like that, Oftentimes they won't keep pushing. They don't want to pay that fee. They just want it done quickly, but there has to be a cost for that as well. These tips are related to talking to your manager. If you are in a company or in a role where your manager is not supportive, that's going to be difficult. So the kind of conversation you would have with them is going to depend on what the culture of the organization is like. I've heard from another arborist that he will have a full schedule and his manager will have made a promise to a client and need him to help with this project. So now he's like working even more. Those are tough situations. Some things that you might be able to say, fully scheduled for X weeks. If you need me to do this project with you, I need to put something else on hold. How do you suggest that I delegate that? Because to some extent, hopefully they would take on responsibility for that. You can also be very clear that I actually can't take on any more on my schedule because the quality is going to suffer. I'm just not going to be able to do a good job on so much work at the same time. Your reputation as an arborist will follow you. So other arborists will see the kind of work you're doing and, over time make certain judgments about the kind of work that you do. People change their minds about that. But in the shorter term, when you're working on projects, the client isn't seeing you exactly, they're seeing the company. So poor work on your part reflects more on the company than it does to yourself for most clients, in my experience. If you can't make any headway with your company, with your boss, it would be good to talk to other people. I think that part of the overwhelm is also feeling alone and isolated, but the reality is a lot of people are going through the same things. So if you know other arborists and you can talk to them, especially someone who's in a similar situation with a work culture that's similar to yours, it can at least feel like I'm not alone, and that can make some kind of difference as well. And finally, you just have to decide if you want to stay at that company. I know that's a kind of a loaded thing to throw on a video like this, but burnout is chronic. It's stuff related to your work situation that continues on. So if it's more cultural, it's more systemic, those are things that you're not necessarily going to be able to change. If your manager sucks and they're not going to be fired and they're not going to leave the company, what you can control is to leave yourself. It's not a decision to be made lightly, but it's also not a good idea to work yourself into the ground for an employer that's not going to hear you out. Again, if you have the option to, that's something to think about. But sometimes we just don't have the option, and you have to find some other ways of maintaining or feeling control, finding some good things about the job to continue on.